Hello, friends. Welcome back. Season 1 was about surviving the role. Season 2 is where we start leading with purpose. And when I think about where that shift really began for me, I do not think about a title or a meeting or some magical moment when I suddenly felt ready. I think about an x-ray room because that was the moment I realized I was no longer only keeping the clinic running day to day. I was building something. At that time, we already had a lab in our clinic, and of course that helped a lot. But there was still a gap in care, and when I really saw it, I could not ignore it. A lot of our patients were older adults on high-risk medications. And we need not just compliance, but we need some labs that needed to be done, imaging, and a follow-through to make sure their treatment stayed on track and its safety matters. The plan made sense on paper. In real life, though, the follow-through was harder than it should have been. Patients could leave without getting their x-rays done, not because they didn't care, not because they were trying to be difficult. They were in wheelchairs, some of them, and could not easily get down to the x-ray department, which was on the basement floor of the building. And some of them were just simply tired of being in the clinic for hours, getting their treatment, waiting for an appointment and all that. And that extra trip was one step too far. Then they would come back for a follow-up visit, and we still did not have any imaging done. That bothered me more than I knew how to explain at that time. Now, when you work in a clinic like that, you start to notice how easily good care gets interrupted by ordinary life. It is rarely some dramatic failure. Most of the time, it's friction, too inconvenient, or there's one more place to go, just to stop for another diagnostic test, one more thing to keep track of. All of that lands on someone who is already tired, already hurting, already overwhelmed, or relying on someone else to get them from point A to point B. Now, when I finally looked at this whole scenario that way, I could feel a shift happening in me. I was not just frustrated anymore. I was starting to think like a builder. That was new. Up to that point, leadership felt like mostly reactive. Somebody always needed something, a process would break, details slipped through the cracks, and a problem would land on my desk, and I would jump in and handle it. That season taught me a lot, but it also kept me very close to the ground. My focus stayed locked on the next task, the next issue, the next thing that needed to be handled before the day ran away from me. This felt different though. I started paying attention to where care was slipping. I started noticing the gap between what we planned, part of the care plan, and what actually happened. On paper, the process worked. In reality, it was easy for people to fall through the cracks. That is when leadership started changing for me. Because when you look at the big picture like that, it's different. It's not only asking, how do I get through the day? It was also asking, what would make this work better for the people we serve? That question will do something to a leader. Once it gets into you, problem stops being only interruptions. They become signals. A gap in care becomes a clue, and repeated frustrations becomes information. What keeps getting missed starts pointing towards what needs to be redesigned. That is a very different way to lead. So I started asking myself how we could close the gap. And that led me into something I had never done before. I built an x-ray room. Now, let me be clear. I had no background in project management. None. Zero. Nobody handed me a guide. And I wish someone walked in and said, here's your how to build an x-ray room from scratch manual. Back then, there was no quick online search to rescue you when you had no idea what you were doing. If you wanted answers, you had to ask people. Talk to human. You look around, you follow word of mouth referrals and figured it out as you go. So that's exactly what I did. I went to the hospital, I went to the radiology department and asked about their x-ray machine, asked who the reps were. And I gathered information the old-fashioned way through conversations and paying attentions. Can you imagine that? Today, you can just chat GPT or Google it. Back then, we didn't have that. Then, I know I'm dating myself. Then I look at the room where we thought we were going to put this machine. I found out it was not big enough. But this is where I have to say something I still appreciate to this day. People really do want to see you succeed. The X-ray company custom built a machine that fit the room I had planned to put it in. That was only the beginning though. The walls had to be reinforced with lead. The door had to be replaced with a lead-lined door. And the room needed its own power line, which meant bringing in electricians. After that came licensing and inspections and radiation checks to make sure that radiation did not scatter outside the four walls. And then I applied for licensing. It was in the middle of all that thinking. I have never done anything like this before. That thing that mattered more in my experience was exactly what I needed. Patients needed it, and that became the anchor. Their safety became the anchor. Plus, their healthcare outcomes would be improved. My comfort, my resume, my confidence level, all that moved to the background. I kept going. I asked questions, made phone calls, figured it out, and made it happen. And eventually we built the X-ray room, got our license, and made it work. What changed after that mattered just as much as the build itself. Patients no longer had to leave the suite to go somewhere else for the next step. We could simply walk them to the X-ray room or wheel them to the X-ray room. Now, if they were in a wheelchair, that made it more convenient. The lab was a few feet away, and later the infusion room would be built in the same office. Over time, the clinic became more truly a comprehensive place because the care was no longer scattered. You don't have to go to the 5th floor for labs and the basement for x-ray. And once the next step became easier, patient compliance improved. That matters. Follow through got better because the friction became lower and the care became more complete. And that was the real payoff. Not that I built an x-ray room, that we had removed one more barrier between patient and the care they needed. And that is when something shifted in me. Up until then, I mostly have been focusing on keeping things moving, handling what came up, and trying to stay ahead of whatever threw at me. In that moment, though, I realized I was no longer only maintaining what already existed. I was shaping it. I was building around what patient care actually needed. And once I saw that, I could not unsee it. That way of thinking started showing up everywhere. I saw the pattern, and the pattern keeps building. Later, when biologics became a common treatment for rheumatoid arthritis and autoimmune disorders, I built an infusion room. That was another way to close the gap in care. And yes, another way to strengthen the business too. Eventually, I got a pharmacy license so that we could not only buy and bill for the drugs, we could also use prescription plans to pay for the drugs. Now, mind you, we always go for the pathway that is easier on patient's pocketbook. And then there was the Hilo and Kauai clinic locations. Those rural clinics were already up and running. Everything changed once infusion the mix. Now the nurses were hauling cold chain meds, IV bag, filtration lines, basically the whole mini clinic in a bag. Everything had to be packed right, charged, transported, and set up correctly in a completely different space. On Oahu, I could walk into a room and see it with my own eyes. Now in Hilo and Kauai, I could not. So I had to lean on the nurses more. I had to give them a big picture and trust them to fill in the details and make it work on the ground. That changed how I led also, because intentional leadership is not about tightening your grip on everything. Do you do that? Tighten your grip when you feel like you're losing control. Now, let me tell you this. It's about getting clearer on what matters, then helping others, your team, rise into it with you. And I think that is important for accidental clinic managers to hear. A lot of us begin in survival mode. We respond to what is urgent and we patch what is broken. We get through the day, thank God. There is no shame in that season. Sometimes survival is the season. But if you stay there too long, leadership becomes one long chain of reaction. Your role gets shaped by whatever fire is burning the hottest, right? That is how most of us start. We respond, we react, we try to keep things from falling apart. But at some point, growth comes from a different kind of question. Not only what's broken, but what's missing. Not only do you ask, how do I survive the day? But you ask, what would make this stronger tomorrow? There's that future thinking. Not only, how would I keep this up? Ask, what am I actually building here? See the big picture. That shift is where intentional leadership begins. And here is the part people do not always say out loud. You do not need to know everything, and you do not need to have a flawless plan. You do not need to feel ready. Intentional leadership starts the moment you decide that your role, the role you stepped into, is something you are going to shape on purpose instead of letting urgency shape it for you. That is why I wanted to open season 2 right here. When I look back on those early years, I did not have the language for any of this. I was just doing my best with what I knew. But now, with some distance, I can see the shifts that quietly changed the way I led. They were not dramatic. And of course, they didn't come with cute labels like this is what you do, this is how not to do. They just shaped me. So I'm sharing it with you. And this season is where we start naming those shifts, not as rigid steps or formulas, but as moments you might recognize in your own story. The times when something in you stretched, got sharpened, or clicked into place. The moments that changed you, how you show up, and if you did not realize it at that time. Because you have those turning points too. And once you can see them, you can build from them. If season 1 was about surviving the initiation into leadership, season 2 is about becoming intentional in how you lead. That is the road we are stepping onto right now. And I want to leave you with one sentence that will carry you into the week. I may have entered this role by accident, but I do not have to lead by accident. Now say it again. I may have entered this role by accident, but I do not have to lead by accident. That is your tool for the week. Not a worksheet or a checklist, just a sentence to carry you through. Let that phrase interrupt the places where you have been leading only by reaction. So let that phrase challenge the places where you have gotten used to living from fire to fire and it became your fuel. No, stop it. And let that phrase remind you that intention starts small. A single better question can open the door, and a clear decision about what care needs next can shift your direction. Even the frustration you keep bumping into can reveal the place you are meant to strengthen. That is how leadership grows. Not all at once, not with one huge giant reinvention, one intentional move at a time. And that, my friend, is where we begin in season 2. Until next time, my friends, stay and deliver on intention. Aloha!